This is the Hip Rehab Program. Let's start with our psoas stretch, which we can complete two different ways. So kneeling on the floor, I'll put my right leg out in front of me, flex my glute, flex my core, and lean forward so that my left hip is being stretched. In the top right-hand corner of this video, you can see me doing the same movement, but standing. This is your choice. Whichever one you're most comfortable with is the one that you should complete. You can do this exercise for about 30 seconds per side, making sure that you're not arching your back, but remaining in a comfortable position to stretch the front part of your hip. Here I'll switch sides, and I'm showing that you can use something to support yourself if you don't feel balanced enough. Make sure to keep breathing throughout this stretch, as it can get difficult. We're working to stretch the front part of the hip, as demonstrated here. Next, let's move on to our IT band stretch. So in a standing position, I'll bring my left leg in front of my right and bend toward my left side. I'll do this for about 30 seconds per side. Leaning to my left, I am stretching my right leg. I'll come out of that position and take my right leg and put it across and in front of my left and lean toward my right side so that I can stretch my left leg. If you need to use a wall to support you, that's okay. Let's come out of that. Let's move on to our seated rotation stretch. So sitting on the floor in a good postural position, I'll bring my left foot up and over my right quad and turn so that my gaze is going over my left shoulder. This will stretch the side of my left hip and might even give me a nice stretch in my back. This should be an easy stretch. We're not cranking to get into position, but we should feel a good stretch through our hip and possibly our back as well. This is a side demonstration of this stretch. So I've taken my right leg, brought my right foot up and over my quad, and I'm looking over my right shoulder. You can hold this for about 30 seconds either side. And let's come out of that slowly. Next, let's move on to our figure 4 stretch. So lying flat on our back, I've got my left foot against the wall at a 90-degree angle, and I'm bringing my right ankle across my left quad and pushing my right knee away from me so that I can get a nice stretch in my right hip. You can also hold your left quad in your hand and take your foot off of the wall. This is a good stretch to move around in, just to find the best and most comfortable position for you. So here I'm showing the other variation where I'm holding my right leg with both of my hands behind the hamstring, and I'm stretching my left hip by having my foot crossed over my quad. To get an even deeper stretch, you can bring your head up off the floor. Like I said, this is a great stretch to just move around in and find what's comfortable for you. Next, let's move on to leg raises. There are two variations to this movement. The first, laying flat on the floor, is a bit more difficult, but if you need a little bit of support, you can support yourself with your elbows like you can see in the top right-hand corner of the screen. Making sure that my core is engaged and my quad is flexed, my ankle is strong, I'm bringing my leg up into the air. You should feel this movement in your hip and only going so far as your range is comfortable. You can do this about 8 to 10 times on either side, making sure that your back remains strong and flat on the floor. Next, let's move on to our abductor raises. Lying on my left side, my core is engaged, and I'm bringing my left leg up and away from my body while flexing my glute. You can do this about 8 to 10 times per side, and it's important to go slowly so that you can feel your glute be engaged. You can also do this with an ankle weight or with a band around your ankles to increase the amount of resistance. If you're not comfortable lying down, you can also do this by standing up and supporting yourself using a wall. Let's switch to the other side. So lying on my right side now, I'm taking my left leg up and away from my right leg, flexing my glute and strengthening the hip. We'll do this side about 8 to 10 times as well. Next, we'll move on to our adductor raises. So again, lying on the floor on my right side, I've brought my left leg over my right so that my foot is planted in front of my quad. My right leg is the one that is working, and I'm feeling this on my inner thigh as I pick my foot up off the floor. Notice that my foot is strong and my leg is flexed during the entire movement, especially at the top. We can do this for 8 to 10 times on either side. Here you can see me set up the movement on the other side. Your range of motion might be more than mine or less than mine, and that's fine. Just do whatever is most comfortable for you and you feel like you're getting a good strengthening exercise. Next, we'll move into hip extensions. So lying flat on the floor, I have my right foot up in the air, but my right quad touching the ground. I'm using my glute to bring my right quad up and off of the floor. Notice that my back is not arching, and as much as possible, the front part of my hip is remaining on the floor. You can do this about 8 to 10 times per side, making sure that you're driving with your heel. Here I'll show you what the movement looks like from the back. So I'm using my left glute to pick up my left leg off of the floor by kicking my heel toward the ceiling. Again, doing this side about 8 to 10 times. Next, we'll move on to hip rotations. So still lying flat on our stomachs with our hips pressed into the floor, I have my right foot up in the air, but my right quad remains on the mat. Keeping my legs strong, I'm moving my foot inward and outward so that my hip can rotate inward and outward. I'll do this movement about 8 to 10 times on either side, with one rep being an inward motion plus an outward motion. You can make this more difficult by adding an ankle weight or increasing the number of repetitions, but always make sure that your quad is staying locked onto the ground and your hip rotating inward and outward is doing the work. It's important to make sure that the front of your hips stay firmly on the floor, that your back remains strong, and that your hip is the one doing the work. So I'll complete 8 to 10 reps on this side as well, but again, you can make it more difficult with an ankle weight or increasing the number of repetitions. That's great. All done with this one. Next, we'll move on to glute bridges. So with our back flat on the floor, my heels about hip width apart, I'll push up through my heels, squeezing my glutes to make myself into a bridge position. Notice that at the top of the movement, my knees, hips, and shoulders are all in line together. It's important to squeeze your glutes to help you push yourself off of the floor. You can relax the glute muscles when you get down to the bottom. Do about 8 to 10 reps of these, and you can make it more difficult with a band, weight, or increasing the number of reps. Next, let's move on to squats. We'll do about 8 to 10 reps of these. Standing with our feet about hip width apart, I'm sinking down into a squat, making sure that my core is engaged, and I'm squeezing my glutes at the top of the movement. My knees are tracking with my toes as I sink into the squat. Here you can see a side view. Go as deep as you can without causing yourself any extra injury and still able to get back up. Lastly, we'll move on to about 8 to 10 reps of lunges. So here, my left leg is the one that is doing the work as it's firmly planted on the floor, and I'm pushing my right leg backward. It's important to maintain good core stability throughout this movement as it requires some balance. If you need some extra help, that's okay. You can balance yourself against a wall or a chair. Here's a side view of what the lunge looks like. It's important to make sure that your back leg does not touch the floor as you move backward, and that your front leg is the one that's doing the work. You should feel this in your quad as well as your glute as you complete your 8 to 10 reps per side. Consider repeating this whole exercise program 3 times.